Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. In this brief video presentation, we're going to talk about the business model cycle. I'm the co-author of the Business Model book with Professor Jerry George. In addition to other research output like journal articles, I'm also the co-founder of 4 biotech companies spun out of university research. After watching this video, you should be able to explain the business model concept, discuss why entrepreneurs and companies should regularly reevaluate their business model, identify the business model cycle, and use the 4 phases that make up the business model cycle. Our first step has to be defining the business model. This may be something that you're already quite comfortable with, but I thought a quick review might be helpful. The business model has been defined in a lot of different ways ever since it came into use in the 1990s. Scholars and practice-oriented researchers have identified a variety of different definitions. Some focus on transactions, some focus on the framework, processes, some are narrative in nature, some are more focused towards value. All of these are useful, and you might want to review them to make sure that you have a good sense of how you want to think about business models. But for the purposes of this presentation, we want to use a definition that we can all agree on, at least for now. And the definition we're going to use here is the one from the Business Model book, which is that the business model is an organizational design used to exploit an opportunity and create value. Now, the Business Model Canvas, which was designed by Alexander Osterwalder, is a wonderful tool for thinking about business models. And we hope that the definition that we've provided helps identify how the Business Model Canvas and other business model frameworks come together into a useful mechanism. But as good as any business model might be, or any specific business model tool might be, every business model has one fairly straightforward problem, which is that it's a snapshot. That is, it takes into account the best information that you have at a given point of time. You're interpreting the organization and its design or its proposed design in a specific context. And that could be viable for a while. That business model could be useful for a short or an even long period of time, especially if you're in a slow changing industry or there's not very much competition, or technology and customer needs aren't changing very fast. And so here is our example. We have our skier who's enjoying headed down the slopes on this wonderful bright sunny day, just kind of recreational skiing here. The problem, of course, is that in any business context, there is the possibility that you may find yourself amidst change, and that change could lead you to be in a dramatically different situation than the one that you thought you were in. Your business model is only viable if it's aligned with the changing needs of customers and the broader competitive context. So here we have our situation where our skier, who previously was in a little bit of a recreational activity on a wonderful bright sunny day, is now finding himself at the top of a ski jump on what appears to be a cold and dark and overcast day. So new opportunities, and this is both a challenge and an opportunity, may require you to adjust parts or even all of your business model. And this is why we developed the concept of the business model cycle, which is a fairly simple framework for ensuring that your business model remains relevant to your situation and your context. The business model cycle is composed of 4 fairly straightforward phases: troubleshooting, redesigning, testing, and redeploying. And we've put these in parentheses on the theory that if you're doing this the first time, then arguably you're designing, testing, and deploying, and then the second time around, you're just coming back and doing very similar things all over again. So let's walk through the different phases here. Let's walk through the different phases so that we know what each element looks like. So troubleshooting. So troubleshooting is at any point in time where you feel that your business model needs to be adjusted. And that could come from intuition, it could come from specific data that you're getting. What we wanted to do, though, was to provide a few suggestions when you probably really do need to do it as compared to when it's simply something that you want to think about for the future. If you have operational failures that appear to be multifactorial in nature, or if your market adoption issues don't seem to be related to your operations at all, or if industry conditions are moving faster than you can change your operations. All of these types of problems suggest that there's a business model issue at stake. Alternately, if you're looking around and realizing that there are new products and services that are going to require more than incremental changes, or that you have products and services that could be attractive to very different markets, those are opportunities that suggest that a new business model or an adjustment in your business model might be appropriate. Redesigning your business model is pretty straightforward. You're using a canvas or some other tool that identifies the components of your business model. You'll probably want to look at changing at least one of those elements. It might be changing the assumptions you're using, the elements themselves, or how those elements are connected together. And that's where the canvases are really nice, because if you've got a canvas made for your business model, you can simply look at each of the different elements and think, how could I change one of these elements or more than one of these elements, and how would that change the way the business model creates and captures value? So a nice example of this might be looking at how Uber developed Uber Eats, right? So Uber is a pretty straightforward service which absolutely everyone is familiar with. You need to go somewhere, and so you use the app to identify a resource. Uber finds a driver near you, hopefully, and that driver then picks you up and takes you where you need to go. Uber Eats, and one place you might want to go is a restaurant, right? So Uber takes you to the food. But what's valuable about Uber is the transportation element itself, right? And someone at Uber realized, we're transporting people, but it's the matching the transportation to the value that's important here. And they realized that maybe you don't always need to go to the food. Maybe you'd like the food to go to you, right? So this is an adjustment in the business model. Many of the resources and activities are very similar, but the value proposition is different, and the aspects of the distribution channel are different. Whereas previously, the driver was the only distribution channel. Now the distribution channel also has to incorporate access to the food itself. So Uber has to have a relationship with the restaurant. And so the beauty of this is that redesigning this business model changes it from driving you to the food to driving the food to you. And of course, this is something that appears to be gaining some traction. Uber, of course, not making money yet, but there's at least the possibility that this could be a valuable addition to how the organization actually functions. Ultimately, once you've done some kind of redesign, you really should do some type of testing. And in the book, we identify 3 types of tests that you can do: thought experiments, information tests, and pilot tests. If you're familiar with lean startup and lean thinking, you probably would recognize the pilot testing as being the one that's focused on there. The idea of getting some type of very specific prototype out in front of customers. And to be sure, those types of pilot tests are the most powerful tests. Usually those are the ones that really tell you whether or not your product actually provides value to customers. But some businesses, technologies, products, and services are more difficult to create convincing or compelling prototypes. And you can often gain a lot of value just from doing thought experiments, brainstorming, common sense, what's likely to happen here? Or if you've worked in a field before or know someone in a field who's worked in this type of field before, how did other organizations launch products or services that were relatively new? Of course, there can be information tests that you can apply, such as primary and secondary research. And to be sure, some data is almost always better than no data. So if you're trying to think about a new app or a new service for students and you can do some kind of online survey, clearly not as powerful as actually prototyping the service and letting them use it, but definitely better than nothing at all. If you can do pilot tests, you really want to find the way to do the maximum feedback for the minimum investment. What's the least you can put into this in order to get lots of good information out? And then observe what actually happens, right? So it's one thing to ask potential customers about how they used or bought or liked the product or service, but it's another to actually observe them and to see what happens when they're put in contact with the potential product or service itself. I can't emphasize this enough, but the best advice you're ever going to get was really well said by a colleague of mine, Jose Estabil, who brought multiple billion-dollar semiconductor technologies to market. And Jose loves to say this simple phrase, make what you can sell. Don't just try to sell what you've already made. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see with entrepreneurs. They make something and then they convince themselves that if they can just go out and educate the market and educate customers, people will buy it. And it's a wonderful idea, but more often than not, it's just not successful. Figure out what you can sell and then make that. And then finally, deploy or redeploy. Does your new business model generate and capture more value than other organizations in your industry? This redeployment process is really one of any kind of product launch or service. There's nothing truly unique about this. Although we're talking about more than just redeploying a product or a service. We're redeploying how the business actually functions. And so for each element of the business model that's new, you probably need to think about how it works operationally, what resources, investments, or processes need to be considered, who's responsible for the changes that need to be made. If you have good operational experience, you've brought other products or services to market, then redeploying a business model probably not too much of a challenge as long as you focus on the value that's being created and not just the elements of the product or the service itself. So this is the business model cycle. And there are always opportunities for organizations out there that are prepared to question the status quo. Apple Computer, perhaps the most famous and most familiar one. Remember, Apple started with personal computers, right? Desktop machines a long time ago. Went through bankruptcy, came back in a completely different mode of innovation and thinking, and changed the way that we think about music and mobile phones and mobile data. Each of these was a business model change. iTunes was a business model change from how music had been sold previously. The iPhone presented a completely different business model for the services and value that we get from our phones. So remember that these kinds of things are often not just a product innovation, they're often a much more complex business model innovation. And the business model cycle can be a fairly effective way to help you think about where your real opportunities are in the future. I hope you enjoyed this brief video presentation. This is Dr. Adam J. Bach, and I wish you the best on wherever your entrepreneurial journey takes you.